Now, perhaps you've been taught that in order for us to run multiple regression, you need to have scale level variables. Well, it turns out that we can actually use nominal or categorical variables in regression, which of course opens up a whole other set and options for our work. So in this video, we're going to talk about how to do that, how to use categorical or a nominal variable in multiple regression. And the way that we do that is by doing something called dummy coding. So we have, in this example, we have three variables: family income, which is going to be our dependent variable, okay, and highest year of school completed, and race of respondent. So I'm interested in knowing what the race of the respondents influence is on income, controlling for highest year of school completed. Okay, so that's my research question there. And in order for me to do this, because one of my independent variables is nominal, we have to conceptualize this a little different. Okay, if I click on here and I go to utilities and variables, I can see information about this variable. Okay, the variable is the race of the respondent. Okay, it's nominal level, and it's got four categories at this point: uh, other, black, white, and 0 is coded as inappropriate, and 0 is coded as the missing value. Okay, so this is part of a bigger survey, and whoever completed the survey, when they coded it, decided that if a respondent's answer to that question of what is your race was did not fit any one of these three categories, then it was considered inappropriate, and it is coded as a missing value. In other words, any for any case that for this variable that is coded with a 0, with a value of 0, is not going to be taken into account in the analysis, because SPSS doesn't count user defined missing values. Okay, so in other words, that means that we have really three categories that we're working with: white, black, and other. And again, the research question is, we want to see how this variable influences our dependent variable of income, controlling for years of school completed. Okay, so in order to do that, we have to proceed with our dummy coding. And essentially, I think a good way to conceptualize this is to think of dummy coding as taking a categorical variable, okay, taking all the categories within the variable and comparing them pairwise to a reference variable or a reference category. Okay, so for our sake, I'm gonna say that white is going to be our reference variable. Okay, and we'll discuss that a little bit later. But how do you pick a reference variable? How do you decide what your reference variable is? You could hear it sometimes being referred to as our baseline variable as well. Okay, and essentially this is just guided by theory, or by the literature, or just by your own thinking of what you think makes sense for to be the comparison for the other categories. Okay, that's all. So you as the researcher decide that. Okay, now what we're doing again is we're not counting those numbers, that 1, 2, and 3. We're not counting them as scale level. If we did, SPSS will let you put this in here just like a regular regression and put this variable in there, and what you're going to get is you're going to get nonsense, because the values for these are going to be 1, 2, and 3, which are really meaningless because they're just labels. So we want to change that, and instead what we do is we go about doing these pairwise comparisons. Okay, another way to conceptualize it or to think about it is that it's almost like we're turning on a variable or off a variable. Okay, and I'll explain myself just a little bit more. But the first thing that we got to do is we have to transform our variable into all of the different categories that we were looking at before. So these three categories, white, black, and other, we're going to make each of these categories, we're going to make it its own variable. That's the first step. Okay, make a variable. So the way we do that is we go on the transform and we say recode into different variables. Now you can recode into the same variable. You don't want to do that. You want to recode into a different variable. Which variable do you want to recode into a different variable? Race is in our case. And we're going to start again recoding each of those categories into a different variable. So if I remember right, other was number 3, right? So we'll start with that one. We're going to name it other. The label will be other. And this already is telling the system that for race you're going to create a new variable called other. Okay, but not for all of it. You want a specific category, right? And other is 3. That was our category value. So here it says old value, and the old value was 3, and the new value is going to be 1. Okay, so you're going to designate the old value as whatever it was in the coding. In our case, for other, it was 3, and for the new value, for every new variable that you're creating here, you're gonna assign it a 1. Okay, and all the other ones, so in this case will be 1 and 2, are going to be now 0. Okay, right here, all other values are going to be 0, and you add that, and this is SPSS's syntax to translate the input that we just did here. When we hit OK, what you're going to notice is that indeed we created a new variable right here. It's called other. Okay, so if we go on the data view, if you remember, we worked with the one that was number 3 here under race. The old value was 3, and we switched it now to 1, and it matches. All the number 3s are now number 1s, okay? And everybody else that's not a number 3 is 0. So another way of thinking of this is sort of like these aren't real numbers. We're not going to use them as real numbers, but you can think of it as being on or off. So for other, these values are turned on, and for everybody else is turned off. Okay, so under this variable, the only one that we're making comparison with are these cases that are on, let's say. Okay, so we need to do that for the remaining categories that we want to compare. So again, recode into different variables. We still want to work with race, but we're going to do black now, which was another category, or second category. I hit change and it says black, and if you remember, I wrote it down. The old value for black was 2, and the new value, just like we did before, is going to be 1. Okay, and we're going to add that in there. Now when we do that, you can see here that this is the old one that we had in there. I'm going to just remove it. Okay, and just for our purposes, I'm going to remove that one too, but we're going to actually give it that same command. But what we're telling it is, okay, for the category that was number 2 is going to be number 1 now, and it's going to be a new variable. Okay, and then the all other variables, just like before, they're going to be turned off. Okay, and so we're going to call those 0. All other variables are 0. We add that, and we continue, and we click OK. And what we should see here is yet another variable created. This one is called black, and again it's turned on for all those that had a value of 2 before, and it's turned off for all the remaining ones. So that went well. And finally we have our last category that we're going to recode, and that was white. if you remember, the old value, or let's just get rid of this. We can leave that if we want, or we can take it off, and just for our sake we're just going to take it off. Be a little bit more clear, but the old value for white was 1, and the new value is going to be 1 as well. So that one's going to keep the same number actually, but all others are going to be 0. Okay? And that should look familiar by now. Again, when we check out our data view, we can see that here we have now 3 distinct new variables that we have dummy coded, and we call it dummy coding because what we're saying is that these numbers aren't real. Okay, and what we're saying is that we're actually just we're counting the data for the ones that have the 1, and we're ignoring all the other ones. Okay, so for white, race was 1, and our original categorical variable. We can see that it was 1, and it is 1 now, and all the other ones should be 0. And it is in fact that way. So now we have 3 different variables that we have extracted or dummy coded from our original categorical variable of race. And this is how we dummy code variables for regression.